Welcome to C# Essentials. This course is a series of videos intended to help beginner developers, and in this module we're going to have a look at some things that some aspects of C# that are built into the C# environment that you can use to perform various operations with variables and data that you have in your application. They're often called static helpers or helper methods, and we're going to learn about them primarily from example. We're also going to have a look at some common mechanisms that are used to convert variable values from one type to another. We have seen some already in the previous episode, in episode 4, but we're going to look at this in more detail. We're already familiar with some of the helper methods that are included in the C# environment, notably console, readline, and writeline. And write we've seen already. The fact is that console is a static class. We'll learn about classes and methods later on in this course. For the moment, unfortunately, you just have to take it as read, as that there are these things called classes, and they have what you could call functions, but because they're in classes, they're called methods instead. And one of these mechanisms is an ability to deal with the console, i.e. the command line, and either to write to the command line or read from the command line. And we've used this already, and it's very, very frequently used in some types of console applications. One that's far more frequently used is in the string space, and we'll look at what that means later, but notice it's capital string, not lowercase string, dot is null or white space, and we can provide it in the parentheses with an argument that gives the name of a string variable in our C# code, and that will tell us whether or not that string has any useful content in it. Similarly for the date time environment, which we'll come to a little bit more now in this episode in a few minutes, similar to string, we have date time, and it, for example, is capable of providing us with the current date and time set for our system, and we'll look at that in examples. A lot of this is better to learn from examples than purely looking at documentation or theory. So these three top methods here, and this is a property, not a method, which we'll get to in the object orientation session, but in contrast, down here, some variable types that are of type string and of date time have additional helper methods specifically for that instance of the variable, and we'll see examples of this in a later section. Before we continue, please remember that the best way to learn how to program is to get your hands dirty, to try hands-on examples, and this is why most of the episodes in this series are largely recordings of hands-on demonstrations in VS Code with narrative and supported by occasional more theoretical slide content. If you have missed previous episodes and you'd like to catch up, there is a link in the comments to the playlist for this series, but it's also shown to you on the screen right now. So you can go there and go back to previous episodes of this series. Please like and subscribe. This really helps us to continue to produce this content and to help others who need to learn more about C# and programming in general. Please also share. Anybody you know that could benefit from this content, please let them know that it exists. And also, very importantly, please comment. Please let us know if you think we could do better, if you would like to suggest that we can improve certain aspects of our content. Please let us know. We really treasure your input. Thank you. Okay, so we learned that in the slides that in addition to string, We also have bool for boolean, which is a true or false value. It's almost like a numeric, but it's not. It's not a string, it's not a number, it's a boolean value. It can only be true or false. And we have date time, which we'll come back to later on in this session. We'll do date time last because there's a lot more to it. But for the moment, after I've put the input in here of my string, I could do something like this. I could say bool is my string empty. Let's call it that. Or let's just call it is empty. It's going to take too long. Is equal to, and now what we're going to do is we're going to use our first static helper method other than console. Console is actually a static helper method, but we're going to use another one. So just like we had console dot and then something, instead here we are going to type in string dot, and then you'll see a whole bunch of things come up here. And you can spend hours and hours and hours having fun learning about what these things do, but mostly you're going to be using is null or white space. And this is used whenever we want to check if a string that we have from somewhere contains anything other than useless spaces, tabs, or it is empty. And I'm going to put this over here. I'm going to say is empty. Is empty. That's what we want in there. Okay, let's have a look at what this does. So we've got our string. Forget the first couple of lines for the moment. We'll come back to them. We're focused at the moment on my string is getting something from a method called readLine, a function called readLine. It gets a string. Then we say we've got a variable. We've called it is empty. It can be true or false. By default, it's always false. The default value for a, oh, that's an important point. The default value for a numeric value is 0. So my int, if I didn't assign anything to it, the value of my int would be 0. The value of a bool variable is false by default. And what we're doing here is we're saying, go into the string namespace, and you start to see what namespaces mean and classes mean and things like that later. Don't worry about that right now. But we have this console class scope, actually, technically, and in there we have a helper method called readLine. We saw that, and we've got something like that, which is string. Notice it's got a capital S. Look at the difference between lowercase string and uppercase string. If we tried to do this with lowercase string, it doesn't give us the same expected. It kind of works, but don't always rely on it. Typically the convention is we do it this way. So just stick with it. If you want to use the is null or white space, start it with a capital S for string. Let's have a look at what this does. So I'm going to start my app, and I'm going to type in something. And it says that's my string ASD. Is it empty? No, it's not empty. It has something in it. Let's run it again. And I'll just hit enter. Ah, look at the difference. Is empty there was false. Now it's saying true. This becomes a huge enabler for something we're going to do in a couple of minutes, because now we have the ability to logically check in our application whether or not that string has something useful in it. So what I'm going to do now is I can use this mechanism to do things that make sense for the world here. So we looked at this earlier. We said in the third example, we did something similar to this. My double equals to, I think it was double dot parse. I think we did something like that, or we used float, I know, but and when it worked, it was great, because we could then show, if we ran our application now, if I type in something like 3.1415 and hit enter, then it says, this is great because my string contains that as a string, not a numeric value. It's not empty. And my double contains that as well because I assigned it over here. Let's try this. Okay, that looks like it's cheating because that's what it was there. Let's try it with a different value. Let's try, let's use a .NET Run and do it with a different value. So we'll do it with 6.3333. There we go. So now we can see that the string contained that. Doesn't matter what my double contained before, what its value assigned was before, its assigned value was before, it now contains the value of 6333, which is what was typed into our string converted to a double value. This is great. The problem, of course, we learned from the third session was that if we didn't type anything into the string, we get a problem. We get this exception happening. Remember the exception from the third example from the basic C#. What it's telling us is that the parse function, remember, it's telling us that at line 18 there is a problem. There's our line 18, and it's where we're trying to get value out of the string, but it's empty. Now we're going to add some logic. Our first bit of simple logic to our, I'm just going to leave this as 0. That's fine. I don't actually need to assign these to 0, but it's generally considered to be a better idea to initialize your variables. If you do not initialize them, C# will complain because here it's saying this is unassigned. There's no value assigned to it. So it's easier when you're working with your variables to just assign some starting value, even though you know that the actual default value of a numeric value is 0. Let's just, for completeness sake, do this. Now what we can do is we say, okay, we're going to take our input from the console. We're going to get a Boolean value to see whether or not there was something was typed in. And then when we do this conversion, to avoid the exception, we are going to say if is empty, else. Notice that I'm indenting. This is to make it easier for me to read. Here I'm going to put in a console.writeLine. You did not enter anything useful. So some kind of error message. Otherwise, we can do the conversion. Our benefit here is we now mitigate the risk of having this error, this exception showing when we don't enter a value into our myString variable. So let's save this and let's go and run our app. Let's try this now. So we can say if I enter 3.1415, that works perfectly. It says the string was captured as this. It's not empty. And the converted numeric double value from that string is this. And if I ran it again and I just hit enter, so there's nothing in the string, it's empty, I don't get the error anymore. Notice my double is now still at its original value of 0. Hasn't changed. No assignment is there. It's saying the string is empty, and you can see here that there's actually nothing shown next to the value of my string. It's just an empty space there. So this is great. This is a great starting point for our simple examples. We will see later in the course that C programmers, well, any programmer eventually gets kind of lazy. This is probably the most correct way of doing this. But we've often learned that, well, I'm not going to use is empty for anything else later. I only need to know if the string is empty for this one check. So what I'm going to do is, instead of doing this, I'm going to take this statement, I'm going to put it in here, and then I'm going to delete this line, and I'm going to, it's more succinct, I guess, shorter, it turns out that this is null or white space is a method or a function that what we call returns a Boolean. We're going to be looking at that in the next session. What the value, what the concept of a method or a function returning a value means. For the moment, just accept the fact that this is null or white space is something that we can send, we can pass it as it's known, something as a variable, a parameter, as we'll call it, and it will tell us whether or not that contains a null or white space. So we've tidied up, we've simplified our code a little bit, which is always important, is to keep our code simple and less code to maintain in the long term. And before we end this session, let's just this demonstration, let's just run it once more, make sure it works. So if I type in empty, then it says you did not enter anything useful. That's great. If I run it again and I type in pi, my favorite number, there we go. Our simple little application is running. We've learned quite a lot so far on these two. We've got the concept of double variables, integer variables, and string variables. And we had a Boolean variable earlier, but then we figured out we don't really need to keep it once we've used it. We have the concept of these helper methods, readline and is null or white space, that do different things, and console.write and writeline. They do different things that we get to learn to understand. And one of them is capable of giving us a result, in this case, a Boolean result of either true or false. If I hover with my mouse over this, you'll see in the top there it says bool is null or white space. Bool there, that at the beginning, is it showing that this method returns a Boolean value. We'll come to that, as I said, later. So if it is a null or white space, then we show an error. Otherwise, we can do the conversion without getting the error, the exception we were getting earlier, and our application works perfectly. So we've progressed very well here, but there's one slight complication, and I want to try and cover this a bit more comprehensively right now before we go any further. We're taking a string and we're checking to see if it contains something, and if it contains something, we're trying to convert that something to a numeric double value. And that's all very well and good. But I'm going to try and simplify this because we don't need the integer for the moment. I'm just going to simplify my code. It's always a good idea to keep your code simple if you can. Makes it more readable, more maintainable. So let's have a look at this. We got my double, it's set to 0. We say please enter the input, and we accept input from the keyboard. And we assign that input value to a variable called myString. We then check to see if it contains something. If it doesn't contain anything, we say you didn't enter anything useful. Otherwise, we convert it from a string value into a double, a numeric value. Remember, a string value can contain things other than numeric digits, and this is the problem. So if I run my little app and I type in 3.114, life is good. But if I run my little app and I don't type in anything, life is good, because we can check, we can see that it's empty, it's null. It's empty, it's not null, it's empty. But what happens if we have something in there like hello? Now, this is alphabetic characters. This is not numeric characters, so it cannot be converted to a numeric value. And if I hit enter, ooh, we've got our exception back. So although our code was clever enough to check for an empty string, something that could potentially be useful to anything, it right now is still failing us in the fact that when we try this with non-numeric input, we get a problem. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change this code slightly. And I'm going to, instead of using parse, I'm going to use try parse over here. And I'm going to put my variable name like that. It's a slight change. I'm still, instead of before it was parse and I took my string as the parameter. I asked it to give me a double value, and the double value that came back I assigned to my variable. So it looked like this, if you remember. My double equals to double dot try parse, to parse. And now if you compare that with what we have, I'm going to comment that out so that you can keep it there. We can keep it there for a reference in our minds, because obviously you would be following along diligently, as you should. So we can see what we did before versus what we're doing now. The interesting thing is the try parse says attempt to convert the value of the string to a double, and if that works, then assign it to my double variable, my local variable, my double. And this variable name has to be prefixed by the word out. The out is there, and we'll see why later when we get to functions and methods and things like that. But if it is successful, then it'll assign it to a value, and this is great. So if I just save this, and if we run our application and I just leave it empty, great, we don't get the error anymore. That's a giant leap forward. And if I type in something, then it works well as well. So this is perfect. And if I type in hello, still don't get the error. So the try parse is mitigating that exception, that error coming up saying, hang on a minute, your string did not contain numeric only digits. The only problem is we don't know at this stage in the code if that works or not. Well, it turns out that if you hover over try parse, you'll see it also returns a double. A bool. It says bool try parse. And what we're going to do is we're going to say that if that else, so we're going to say console, sorry, I've missed one parenthesis closing here. So here I'm going to say right line. Here I'm going to say conversion done, and I'll just copy this to save us some wasted time. And here I'll say I'm going to interpolate this input here and say your input, and I'll just put it here in my string, can't be converted to double value. Something like that. Okay. So not only are we going to do the try parse, but we're going to see if try parse tells us how successful it was. If it says true, I was successful, then we're going to say conversion done. Otherwise, we're going to show an error saying your input cannot be. And you know what we often do as well is we delimit this with some other fixed delimiter like parentheses. We don't want to use curly braces because that'll confuse it. But if I use parentheses, it'll surround my input with whatever it contained. Let's have a look at this. Enter nothing, it works. Try again. Enter something garbage. It says your input cannot be converted. Notice it's surrounded usefully by, so we can see what spaces or anything were also entered, if anything. Cannot be converted to a double. And then finally we could do stuff like 3.14. There we go, and then our conversion works. So this is a giant leap forward using these helper methods, or helper functions as some people would refer to them, like try parse, like is null or white space, are very commonly interspersed in our code to do things like converting between one type of value and another, and attempting to convert from strings to numeric values and all sorts of things like that. Fantastic. So we've learned about basics of numeric inputs, integer and double. We've learnt about Boolean trues and falses, and we've learnt about strings. Let's have a little bit of a look now at date time, because date time is a very, very frequently used data type for variables in our C# applications. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to type in date time, my date time to that now, and I'm going to assign to it a value of the current system date and time, which I can do as follows. Apologies for that. So this is another one of these static helper methods that are lying around in the C# environment. Date time says, tell me what the time is now and display it for me. So there's the date time now. And I could obviously just do a console write line. Let's interpolate it. So we want to substitute my date time now, and we can just my date time now, do something like that. It'll work. Just make sure that that works so you can see what the behavior is. Obviously it'll give us a long string. You'll see this is the format is it's this is the current date and time for me right now, so it is the 11th of August 2026 at 17 minutes past 7 in the morning and 13 seconds. And that's great. So you can do this kind of thing. Another way that you could do this is you could take, or you could work with dates, is you could, for example, say console.writeLine, just to give a prompt. So we'll say, please, in fact, let's not do a write line, we know we'll do a write. Please enter your date of birth, and maybe give it a prompt of, I don't know, year, month, day, let's say, something like that. Don't worry about the details of this too much. At the moment, it will be quite clear what we're trying to do in a few seconds. And then we're going to say string, my string equals to console.readLine. And we know very well what that does now. So now, oops, sorry, that should say day, for example. There's a whole bunch of different date formats that C# is capable of. They're called locale settings, L-O-C-A-L-E. You can research them yourself. I'm not going to spend time on that in this course. There's plenty of time for you to go online and have a look at different input formats for dates and times. What I want to do is something we saw earlier on that said that if string dot is null or white space, so here we're going to say something like console.writeLine, no DOB entered. Else, here we're going to do a conversion of this to, let's say, date time. My DOB equals to datetime.tryParse. No, I'm not going to do that. We're going to say that my DOB equals to datetime.now, because it needs to be initialized to something. It needs to have a value before we do a try parse. And then we're going to say datetime.tryParse, and we're going to say we're going to take the my string input and we're going to put the output into my DOB, something like that. And I'm going to move this line over here. That's great. and I'll just put DOB. Something like that. Okay, let's have a look at it now. So it's giving us a warning about inline where we are not checking to see if we've got a null, but we'll deal with that later. So it's kind of a superfluous warning because we've mitigated that because we're checking for null and empty, and then we're doing a try parse for date time. Notice before we did try parse for double and for int, now we're doing it for date time. So what I'll do is I'll type in 2000, whoops, sorry, 2000 slash 06 slash 13. And now it's saying, that's great. Okay, so it's saying that we've got the current date time is 11th of the 8th, 2026, and you entered 13th of the 6th, 2000. Notice it's automatically changed format, date display format for the locale that we're in. Well, here's an interesting thing. How about we check to see how old we are? So what we can do is we can say something like this, and this is where you will find that some types like datetime have lots and lots of useful static helper methods, whereas string, for example, only really has is null or empty, or is null or whitespace as useful ones. What I'm going to do now is I am going to subtract the one date from the other. So here I'm going to say that my date time now is the current date and time. So I'm going to say that my int age in years is equal to my date time now dot subtract my DOB, and then take the years value. Now I'll go through this very slowly again, but what I'm doing, notice, is I'm hitting the dot. So it's saying subtract is a helper method for this date time variable. So I can subtract from one date, I can subtract another date. After that, I can put another dot here, and I can type in year. Whoops. Should be years. Where is years? Total years, I think. No, not seeing years. Doesn't make sense. Oh, I could just take it as days and divide by 365. So days. So this is age in days. Right, let's do this again. I thought it had years, but it doesn't. So that'll give us a number of date and age in days, and then we could do something like int age in years equals to age in days divided by 365. And obviously that would, because it's an integer, it will round down, because the fraction will be lost for partial if we part through a year. So what we're going to do is we're going to change our display string here to add age in days and then age in years. Really simple stuff. So let's have a look at this before we run it. We are converting the string that we entered into a date. We looked at that earlier. So now what we're saying is take the date that we've got now, the current time, subtract from it the date that was the date of birth, and then figure out how many days that is. And then from that, figure out how many years that is by dividing by 365 and then converting the total. Before we fix this, because there's one lurking bug there, which we will have a look at now. Some here, we've got a by, not seeing it. apologies, don't know where that came from. That's better. There's a line 3. Okay, so we're going to say it was 2001/06/13, let's say. So it's saying, and it looks reasonably correct, it's saying to us that we have that it was roughly 25 years, which is correct because it was just over a year ago, just over a month ago, 2 months ago, that would have been our 25th birthday. If we were born in the 13th of June 2001, we would be 25 years old now. So that looks great. It's a simple example of a starting point for a working solution where we're working with date time values in addition to integers. Obviously we could have doubles and floats and bools as well. One final improvement that we'd want to do here is we would want to say what happens if there isn't a valid date of birth in that time. So what we can do here is we can say if this is true, in other words that worked, then we can do the conversion from string to date time and then the calculation of how many years it is. Otherwise we're going to have something like console.writeLine, you need to input a valid date. Okay, save our file. Let's do it final run for our example app, our simple example app. So here is our 06/13. Great. The age in days is 9,190, which is 25 years. Looks about correct because it's 25 years, 365 a day. So it all looks good. The difference between that date and that date, which it's calculated for us, it did the subtract, that's perfect. If I did just hit enter, then it says no date of birth entered, which is perfect. That is the check over there. If it was empty, don't do anything. Just say no date of birth entered. And if it's not empty, if it's some other nonsense, so let's type in nonsense, you need to input a valid date. Really important for you to understand the simplicity of this application and how it works by following yourself, kind of following along. Maybe pause the video from time to time, type this in, and make sure that you are getting values in your terminal output that are similar to what we're getting right now in this recording. One final note on this before we go on to more interesting things is that if I had an integer value, let's put our int back, my int equals to 0, I could also try the same trick with an integer. So I could say, for example, my int equals to int.parse my string. Or I could say if, and I like to use the capital I here instead. Oh no, I have to use, my apologies. Try parse out my int, then I could do something. So in a similar way to double having the try parse, all numeric types, float, int, in fact all types have date time has try parse as well, as we'll see in a few minutes. But numeric types all offer a try parse that can, the return value of Boolean can be used to see whether the conversion succeeded from string to that type. Thank you for spending your valuable time with us. Please join us for future sessions and learning how to code and to code in C#. Please remember as much as possible to try to experiment with the hands-on examples we are showing you in these episodes. Please like and subscribe so that other folk can get the benefit from this content. And also, please let us know if you have any recommendations about changes we can make or topics we can cover in the future. Thank you.